Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Vickie Fung, Chief Mission and Strategic Officer of the Arthritis Foundation. Vickie, thank you for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
One of the reasons that we brought you onto the podcast, talk about the wonderful leadership experience that you have and how you've gotten there and how you've navigated the East-West cultural differences. So I thought I'd start and maybe ask what was your career experience that led you to be Chief Mission and Strategic Officer at the Arthritis Foundation?
Thanks for asking that question. It's certainly for anyone that's trying to climb the corporate ladder. It takes a lot, and I'm 27 years now with the foundation. And so, as I started climbing in my career, I wanted to really be intentional about where I was headed and where my interests are. I'll just back up and say that I'm American-born Chinese. I was raised in a household that was very rooted in Eastern culture and values. And so with immigrant parents, they oftentimes define your choice of study and your choice of where where your interests lie. And so I thought I loved medicine. And
Mm,
and after I failed OChem in college, I decided that was not the path for me. But then I discovered this world of public health, and that's what opened my eyes to a world of opportunity, um, and really kind of started my career path towards the Arthritis Foundation. During that time, I was interning for the LA Times, and I
mm,
was programming and organizing health and wellness programs for the employees. And the Arthritis Foundation happened to come in as a lunch and learn speaker one day. And I was graduating soon, and so we got to talking, and they had a program director position open. So that's where you begin to look at opportunities. And so they invited me to interview, and I was lucky enough to be offered the position. And so what I started realizing early on is that you have to be so intentional about where opportunities are, what you're looking for, and how to move yourself, you know, um, up that ladder. And again, being intentional about it. I could look back and I can see 5 year increments in my entire career. So I started out as a program director,
mhm.
and was able to move into a VP role regionally. And then the next 5 years, I was able to move from a VP to a chief regionally. And then our company merged. So we were 70 separate entities and we became one. And so you can imagine we had to downsize. There were a lot of
Mhm.
reductions in force. And so I actually had to reapply to positions. But one of the things that was important that I found is that as you're moving up, you really need to have some make reputation for yourself, and really make sure you find ways to volunteer for some extra things so that executive leadership hears your name and sees what you're doing. And that's where some of those doors open. And so every 5 years, I was looking at where else can I go within the organization. I didn't want to go anywhere else. I love what we do. I love our mission. But I continue to kind of find ways to apply and to move myself up. And so once we merged, I was
Mhm.
able to kind of continue to move up, but then COVID hit. And then
Ah,
I had to again face reductions in force and really do some soul searching in terms of, can I stay here or am I going to risk losing my job? Um, and so luckily, executive leadership, they kind of they my name was not unfamiliar, and so I landed some more positions at the national level, and then now finally, I'm lucky enough to be second in line to the CEO position. So it sounds like it's a quick kind of journey, but it was 27 years of very strategically looking at opportunities and what doors open and which ones you step through, and really working hard, and volunteering for those extra tasks. So
that totally makes sense. And there's so much to unpack there because there's a
yeah.
lot, I think, that resonates, I think, with our audience and myself as well.
Hmm.
So I think I'll start off with the first one, right? Because what you said about, oh, the parents expect to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I
Yeah.
did not go that way either. I did not go
No.
the public health way. When, so I think two-part question, right?
Yeah.
When did you realize that you could, take an adjacent path, right? It didn't necessarily you had to be a doctor, but you could do public health in your case, right?
Hmm.
And then second, how did you kind of, if I'm open, over convince your parents that that was okay and that you're going to be okay as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when you acknowledge that a particular area is just not for you. So when I failed OChem, when I failed physics and couldn't get through those courses, you really have to have that self-awareness. You know what are you trying to do here? And let's try to find the path that's going to work best. So I had to kind of go through that process, and it really was happenstance that I there was a class called Public Health 101 that was being
Mm,
offered. I'd not even heard of that term before, but it was interesting, the description. So I thought, let's try it and see and just discover. And I was still in college, so that gave me an opportunity to have that chance to still, discover. Um, my parents really didn't understand what the MPH was. I will be very honest and open. It's I don't know if it was so much convincing them. I was headed towards a master's. They liked the fact I was going for an advanced degree, so maybe that helped make the decision. But they really never quite understood what public health means.
mm,
But they just knew that I was in charge of a lot of programs, and that was a good thing, and that I was taking my education and doing something, good with it.
mhm.
So I think that paved the path a little bit, but I think for some of the listeners here, it is tough because, yeah, like you said, sometimes that path is like they want to choose it for you, but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, 100%. No, and totally makes sense what you said. It's like I think it's not, especially when you're younger, right? You
Yeah.
fixate on what your parents say, that singular word, like you have to be a doctor or a lawyer or
Hmm.
something. But to your point, what the parents want is that, hey, you're doing something good and valuable to society. And that's what they
Right.
ultimately want. And sometimes when we're young, we don't recognize that, but that totally makes sense. You hit on something that was interesting, right? Yes, you spent 27 years at the Arthritis Foundation, but you mentioned the LA Times, which
Yeah.
I find very interesting, and I think a lot of our audience and think it's very linear path, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like I'll speak for myself, but it's not like I went through a lot of different industries, right? I went from aerospace to
Hmm.
tech to financial services to account management, etc. So I took a variety of roles. So
Hmm.
I'm just curious of how you ended up at the LA Times and then realized that um, I'm going to phrase the question this way. When did you start thinking about your 5 year iteration or 5 year plan, let's call it?
Right.
Because I find that fascinating because I only learned that when I was older, like after I went through multiple jobs and looked back on them.
Right. So the LA Times was an opportunity. It was an internship opportunity. It was
Hmm.
probably the first kind of official job that I received a paycheck for
Hmm.
because most of my work was volunteer. And I think that if you are lucky enough to still be early in your career and you're still trying to discover, you really should take on and try to experience as much as you can. So it's good that
Hmm.
you've actually experienced a lot of different industries because that's what's going to help point you in a certain direction.
Hmm.
So the LA Times actually opened up that opportunity, and I would have never been with the Arthritis Foundation if it weren't for that lunch and learn speaker that came that day.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think sometimes there is some luck in this where if you're in the right place in the right time,
Yeah.
you hit upon an opportunity, but you do need to keep all all your opportunities wide, and don't narrow yourself too quick.
Hmm.
And it was only when I started working at the program director level in the Arthritis Foundation, I was early in my career, I started realizing, you know what, there are these other jobs that are also interesting. And so that's when I started to realize a pattern of 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, because I
Hmm.
would strategically look at positions every couple of years to
Mm.
get myself to the next level. Okay, I'm at a director level. How do I get to the next, And for a lot of, I'm speaking mostly from nonprofit charity, health charity. So that's my
Hmm.
experience. Most nonprofits are very flat. So there's not
Hmm.
a lot of growth.
Hmm.
So that's why you have to even be more strategic and figure out, okay, if you're pursuing the title or the salary or leadership positions, how are you going to get there? And you have to talk to people. You have to express your desire maybe during your year-end performances and to say, hey, I'm looking for a professional growth. How do I keep going? So
And that kind of leads into that East-West culture question as well, right? Because I think there's a perception that I think in Eastern culture that, hey, if I keep my head down, do good work, I'll automatically get promoted. And my
yeah,
experience, and also sounds like yours, is like, no, you have to advocate for yourself.
yeah,
So um, for me, as an example, it took me a bit to get out of that mindset. And I'd say I still have a lot of growth and to do in terms of like that advocacy to your point at
yeah.
year end, et cetera. How did you kind of maybe break the cultural education that you had, let's call it, and kind of realize, hey, I should be advocating myself and this is the way I should do it, that type of thing.
Yeah, it is hard. And as a woman, even harder because
Hmm.
there are some biases about, Asian women and there are some assumptions about who we are and so I don't probably fit the mold. So growing up even within an immigrant family, but I grew up here. And
Hmm.
so what I learned early on is that you have to take the best of Eastern and Western and
Hmm.
leverage those to your advantage. So to me, I'll give an example. At the Arthritis Foundation, we have some core values. One of them is teamwork. And I thought, oh, that's great. Eastern value. It's all about teamwork, the collective good, harmony. So I excel in that. But the other core value is transparency and directness. Is being honest and direct. That's a very Western culture. So for me, I had to work very hard over the years to make sure my opinion was voiced in a respectful way, but not to be timid, not to internalize my opinions. And I really needed to be able to communicate it so that whether your opinion is accepted or not, just that they heard a voice. So, one
Hmm.
practical example I can give is every single meeting I'm at, I always say something. I never
Hmm.
leave a meeting not saying something because what happens is that people start to, oh, they don't have anything to offer. They're very quiet. And that's a very Asian way. So
Hmm.
I just always, whether I know the topic or not, whether I'm familiar with it, I just always try to say something. And it's helped me throughout the years. It's helped me to gain confidence. And then now, be a lead in a lot of what I do. And so hopefully that answers a little bit of that. But it's not easy. You really have to work hard and be intentional and almost work like intentionally be self-aware of
Hmm.
of you know of that because it's very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's anyone I talk to that's gone through the journey that you have.
Mhm.
It's very much you have to be willing that not only have that self-awareness, but have that willingness to experiment. But
Yeah.
even if it's small experiments, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
it's like at least saying something at a meeting
Yeah.
and being intentional about like, hey, how can I do better next time?
Hmm. Right.
One of the interesting things you said is like again, you bring the East West culture, but then there's unfortunately, stereotypes that come with being a woman. So how did you overcome that, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, sometimes it's unintended,
Hmm.
and a lot of people continuously are trying to overcome that. But
Yeah.
sometimes we have to meet individuals halfway. So, did you find you had to do that, or did you have to just be self-aware of that in terms of how you presented yourself, for instance?
Yeah. I think the self-awareness is a big thing. And I
Hmm.
always recommend people, whether you're a man or a woman, but there are a lot of self-assessment questionnaires and surveys. And I
Hmm.
think it starts there with understanding who you are and your style, and then finding out what's important to the company or to the boss or to your colleagues, and then adapting that to whatever's important. Um, because I find you mentioned a really good thing is if you aren't able to meet in the middle, or it makes it really hard for you. So I think having the self-awareness, knowing your own work style and your own way of going about things is really important. And so it helps you to, again, figure out how do you align yourself better to continue to move forward. I will say that it's been tough. I'll give an example. One boss, for whatever reason, thought always turned to me and wanted me to hold his coffee. So, hey, Vicky, can you just hold my coffee for 1 second? And for a while I thought, oh, maybe it was just, he had stuff in his hands. He wanted me to hold his coffee, but I felt like it was starting to happen a lot. And
Hmm.
so I gently made a joke about it and say, "Oh, I'm carrying your coffee again," and he didn't even realize he was doing it. So that's where unconscious
Hmm.
bias comes in. He didn't
Hmm.
even realize he was, and he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize," and so I've never carried his coffee again. But I think a lot of people don't realize what they're doing either, and so to step out courageously and to just respectfully say something. I think it's a hard thing to do, and you almost have to practice it and say, because a lot of people would just not say anything. I'll be okay. I don't want to say anything as my boss, and but you have to be courageous and
Hmm.
respectful, but you have to say something. So
And that actually brings me to the next question, right? Because again, it goes back to the stereotype of, oh, Asians are timid, and there's a perception that we don't necessarily speak up for ourselves, right?
yeah,
How did you, and you're in a C-suite role, so you've
mhm,
obviously learned, but how did you learn, right? And
yeah,
because I've told people it's a process, right? And I would assume that that's even more critical, particularly that 5-year reevaluation that you have to
mhm.
communicate. Now, I'll follow up with another question after you answer this one on that, but like, how did you kind of like build those communication skills?
Yeah. It's you know, you practice and you learn and you make mistakes, and you you have to move quickly past them and keep going.
Mm,
I mentioned earlier that it's really important to figure out what your company prioritizes, what's important to your company and what's important to your boss. Because if you don't really zero in on those things, then you're kind of just there working and doing your job. But
hmm.
if you want to do the extra and you want to get your name recognized, you have to figure out what's going to make you shine. And outside of all the other employees that are on staff. So those are the things that I kind of consciously, focused on, tried to figure out, again, what's important to the company, how can I be uh, a strong supporter, toe the company line, not be a troublemaker, and how do I communicate in a respectful way? And I think the biggest thing I will always say is you can communicate and be respectful and kind all at the same time. And you have to stick with it because it can be very easy to, go off the rails maybe, or become upset, or have your emotions overcome you, and that's not going to help you. So over time, I just learned, again, how do I play to what the organization feels is important, and how do I communicate in a respectful way? Um, and it really helps. And so the reputation I'll say I have at work is I'm fair, but I'm firm, um, but I'm
Good
kind.
reputation. Good
So
reputation to
yeah,
have.
and that's what and that's important to me, and so that's how you build it over time. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you brought up having that visibility, right? I'm going to ask a slightly generational question because
Hmm.
we've seen, you see a lot of social media and you see a lot of the younger generation, Gen Alpha, Gen Z, say, well, I'm not going to take on the extra work
Yeah.
because, they're not compensating me well enough or
Mhm.
whatever reasoning there is. But in your career path, you've taken on the extra work for that visibility,
Yeah.
right? Which I think I've done myself as well. Where do you, I mean, I think you were very strategic from what you've described in terms of the type of work you take on. So I think for our audience, how do you kind of, we're hearing two different voices, and
Yeah.
like maybe not to say which one's right, but how would someone make their own choice based
Yeah.
on what you're hearing?
Right. Well, here's the thing is that the things I volunteered for weren't always fun things.
Hmm.
So, but I think the more important thing is it's not about what you volunteered for, but did you follow it all the way through? Did you demonstrate that you had passion around it, that you were dedicated and committed to it, even if it's as simple as, I don't know, folding paper and a mailing and putting stickers on it, which is what I did way back when. And so I think if you want to move up, you've got to be willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and sometimes do some of the things that you may not be glamorous. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, leadership is going to be looking at your commitment, your passion towards it, your willingness to jump in and do it. I think the last thing, and now that I'm a supervisor manager, I'll say the things I don't want to see are complaints. The unwillingness, hey, can I just do it a different way and this will be a better way? So I think that it's important to kind of to when you're volunteering for things, it's not always going to be glamorous, but at the end of the day, can you make the difference and can you show that? I think
Hmm.
that's what's important.
That makes sense. The follow through is critical, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, um, even with generative AI or humanoid
Mhm.
robots, we're not there yet. We still need people
Right.
to actually do things. So that totally makes
Exactly.
sense.
Yeah.
Now that you're C suite, you've interacted with your CEO. Um, have you? I mean, I'll ask a basic question: is it different, or is it the same principles apply?
Yeah, I think the same principles apply. I think that certainly for the CEO of an organization, they have their own needs, they have their own interests, they have their own ways of working. And so, again, the self-awareness and also the awareness of how your boss, how the CEO functions is really
Mhm.
important. To me, I always say one of the primary roles for the C-suite is make the CEO shine, make
Mm,
help support the CEO, and if he or she succeeds, everyone else will succeed. And so that's why sometimes I get assigned different projects and things, and but I'm always willing to jump in because if I can help further our work, then I will. Then that's good. So I've worked for probably seven national CEOs, a couple of
mhm.
local CEOs, every single
Oh
one
wow.
different. Yeah.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day is can they rely on you? And do they know that you're committed, you're dedicated, you're going to go the extra mile to get something done? And that's what I was always in my head is how do I make my CEO's job a little easier? And then that builds trust, and that's a big thing too. They need to be able to trust you. And so me being in the number two position, it's scary because if he ever wins a lotto and goes away, I'm at the helm of an organization that's a $70 million organization. But I think the one other thing I would just say is you want to know the business and you want to know all aspects of the business if you can. Learn as much as you can. That's helpful too.
That actually leads me to the other question because you emphasized it even before you got to the C-suite role that you're in now, which is know what your boss's needs are
Mhm.
and know the organization. How did you do that? Because sometimes, like the organization's easy, right? You pick up the annual report or you look at some existing internal material, etc. But understanding your bosses or your managers, excuse me,
Mhm.
um, work style, I'll call
Yeah.
it, is a little harder to decipher, right? There's no manual for it. So how did you kind of figure
Yeah.
out how to adapt? I wouldn't say adapt, but understand what he or she, your that manager was looking for.
Yeah. You know, I think it's easier than folks think
Mm,
because if you look at your manager and you know that they there's certain triggers that upset them in a workspace, or there are certain priorities that they are focused on because it's in their year-end performance review. I always
hmm
say try to find out what your boss's priorities are because if you can help them with that, then that's good.
hmm
But I think the softer skill of reading your manager is something that you intentionally have to be always be looking at because I think many times we are looking at ourselves trying to figure out um, you know our own either behaviors or what's the next step. Oftentimes we're not looking outwards and looking at that person in front of us, our manager, say, what are they looking for and what's going to make them happy or what doesn't make them happy? How do I line myself better towards that? I'll say, for instance, my CEO now, and I don't think he would mind me saying this, but he works at 100 miles per hour. He is lightning speed. He talks at lightning speed. So, what I've learned in working with him is that I have to really be on top of things and make sure that I'm almost ahead of him because he's going so fast and furious. He's also visionary. So what he tends to vision, I tend to operationalize. And so
Mm,
we work in that kind of partnership and and it works well. So those are just some examples of how I've just tried to really figure out again, the boss's style and then work through that. And that might be a combination of Western, Eastern, again, leverage the strengths of both cultures to help you. So,
that totally makes sense.
yeah.
I mean, you're in unique company, right? You are the C-suite of a major national nonprofit. How how is the environment in terms of nonprofits in terms of overall leadership and female leadership in particular?
Yeah. With nonprofit, folks many times think, oh, it's less intense. I think it's just intense of a business because you have a budget, you have revenue, you have income and expenses that you have to manage. So I think where I sit and where my strengths have really helped me is that I started out with my MPH very health focused, but I've slowly over time evolved my skill set to include strategic planning, annual
Mm,
planning, budgeting. So now I actually oversee our organization's annual planning and budgeting process um, from the beginning to the very end. And it's it's a job no one likes. They don't want to do it. I fortunately love it. And so I found myself a niche to be able to carve out for myself. And so on the C-suite, my colleagues are like, oh, oh, great, Vickie's going to do this part of it. And so I've found some ways to enjoy things that I like to do that maybe others don't as much, and to help leverage that for me. In a major nonprofit, the stress can be intense. I mean, you may not have you know stockholders, or you may not have but you do have board members, and you have volunteers that are holding you accountable. And so we still have to make sure our deliverables are met, our annual plans and goals are met, and that we're really being careful with precious donor dollars that are coming to us. So at that C-suite level, we have to make a lot of hard decisions about things, whether that be staffing, resources, how we run the business. And so I've been fortunate to have CEOs along the way that have allowed me to learn parts of the business that I wouldn't normally know about. And so it's given me opportunity to be kind of broad in my ability to manage. So.
That kind of leads me to one of my final questions was, you've taken your career in 5-year chunks, right?
Mhm.
How do you, I think, look at the next 5 years in the C-suite? Because it is as they say, it's lonely at the top, right? But it
Yeah.
sounds like with our Arthritis Foundation, at least you have a team. But how do you kind of navigate through that in terms of still being curious and learning a lot
Right.
when sometimes I don't want to say you get stuck, but you have to be much more strategic in
Right.
terms of your next move, right?
Yes. Um, I'm fortunate because I'm given a lot of projects that really challenge me still, and it keeps me interested and engaged. And I think if you're at a position where you've been there for a long time, that's important to continue to challenge yourself, learn new skills, and be engaged at that level. I think for myself, along the way, you get married, you have a kid, you have a four-legged friend, then you become a caregiver.
Hmm.
So life things have happened along the way in those 5-year chunks. And so now I'm at a point where I'm also looking at, okay, my son is in high school, he's gonna be going to college. I have to keep working to pay for college. So those are things that really are real things in my mind. And so, but again, if you're finding ways to stay challenged and continuing to stay engaged, I think the work will never get boring. And you want to be in a place where the mission really means something. And I think that's why I've stayed here so long. People have come and gone, but I love the work and I love the mission. And so at the C-suite level, I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that I'll continue to stay here. And I know I have a great relationship with my boss, and so we trust each other. He continues to give me lots of things to work on, and so I see my next 5 years even still with the company. It Here's one thing I will say is that I don't think I want to be the CEO. I am happy with the number two position. And I say that, and it sounds strange because I am an introvert by nature.
Hmm.
And knowing that the CEO position is such an extroverted kind of role,
Yep.
I support my boss whenever he has to go out and do 100 different kinds of presentations, and he does it so well. And he appreciates that I support him and get him set up, but that I don't need to go out to all of those things. So so that's kind of where I see the next 5 years is stability and just continuing to support the CEO. So yeah,
And I think your last example is a perfect example of that self-awareness, right?
yeah,
Because everyone has, and because of the variety of roles that you've experienced in your career, you know what you like best, right? It's
yeah,
not that you can't do it, it's just
right,
you know that you like being kind of like I always like to say the chief of staff, right? It's like you
yeah,
don't want to be in front of the customer. And it's kind of funny. I remember when I was at a publicly traded company before my current role, everyone was jealous because, oh, he gets to go to the Super Bowl because the company was a major sponsor. But everyone keeps forgetting. It's like, yeah, but he's wining and dining major clients.
Yeah,
And it's not like you can be yourself on a couch eating Cheetos watching the Super Bowl. It's like this
right.
is a business function and you
Yes.
have to be on. So,
Yeah.
and for some people, like that's natural. Like they're
Right.
not tired. But for others, it's like, I can do it, but I'm going to be exhausted afterwards. So I hear
You're
100% what you're saying.
so right about that. And that's why I think earlier I mentioned that take one of those assessments. There's so many of them.
Yeah,
They're free online because you will learn some things about yourself that are pretty spot on. And again, the self-awareness of what you gravitate to and what you kind of don't is important. So
100%.
yeah.
Well, Vickie, this has been a great conversation. I always like to leave the podcast with our speaker, our guest, with the final words. So, do you have any final thoughts or final words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I it's nothing too complicated. I always say don't give up and keep going. I always say stay true to yourself because you will often find you may get swayed one way or another. And the one thing that one of my previous bosses always told me was, Vicky, be who you are, stay true to yourself, because you will continue to grow and people will recognize it, and then you'll reap the rewards of it. So to me, that's really what's important. Is what has guided me throughout the years. So
Excellent. Well, many thanks, Vickie. I think this was a fascinating interview, and I'm sure our audience will love it.
thank you.